red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome back to The Social Ties. It's been a long time. I'm thrilled to be back with a very familiar face. You know her, she's been on the show a few times, the amazing Chantal Lunt. Hi Chantal, how are you?
Good, I'm good. As good as you can be the day after the police ground sentencing and court school's gone through, but I'm okay. We'll get through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feeds us right into exactly what we're going to be talking about today, Chantal. Today we're going to be talking about Operation Withdraw Consent. For anybody who doesn't know what that is and why it's so important, Chantal's going to talk us through it. So Chantal, can you give us a little bit of background? What is this? What is Operation Withdraw Consent?
So basically, Operation Withdraw Consent is something that's come from conversations that I've been having for a while. I was obviously a former police officer, and in the UK, there's this something that the police and the government tell us is that we are policed by consent, which basically means that the majority of the public consent to the current model of policing, and we consent to the way that we are policed. And, you know, with everything that's happened with Sarah Everard, with Child Q, with BLM, and with the, you know, the policing of protests, which we can see is quite disproportionate, quite violent, and we can see visibly the oppression of working class people, whilst at the same time, things like corruption in Parliament, you know, drug taking in Parliament, parties during COVID are largely overlooked by the police. There's been a big question that's constantly asked of me, and something that I discuss quite often, which is, can we withdraw consent? And it went from a statement of we need to withdraw consent to someone asking me on its Twitter spaces, can it be done? And I have researched this quite a lot, and, you know, really did have a few ideas about this. And the person who asked me, when I said, well, I think it can, you know, if we collectively withdraw consent, and if we use some of the structures that have been created for us to have a voice within police, then I think we can withdraw consent. And the person who asked me was actually quite taken aback. They were like, oh, I didn't think you could. I didn't think it was real. And I was like, well, it's not really real, but if, you know, if it's not real, then we can also contest it like at an ideological level, and we can contest it as an idea. If consent is just an idea, then we can challenge that idea with other ideas and also a bit of a structure too. So from that conversation, interestingly, the person who brought me on, it was like a Twitter Spaces, ended up getting involved with setting up Withdraw Consent, and was like, yeah, you know what I mean, everyone I've gone to with the structures, like, yeah, that looks like something that we can really get up and running. But it is basically just questioning the premise of the police, questioning the model of policing, and even policing as a concept. When we say policing, it doesn't mean the police, like policing as a concept doesn't actually mean the police. It's just how you respond to, you know, challenges and conflict within communities. There's communities, Indigenous communities, communities all over the world who don't have the police, but they do have models of policing where it's very much community owned. People will go to councils, and there'll be, you know, community retributions and things like that that don't involve locking people up and don't involve having officers with batons coming in and causing a lot of harm. So it is really questioning what we know about policing. It's making people aware that policing as a model is less than 200 years old. It's a relatively new social experiment, and even by the police's own standards, it's one that's going very, very badly. So yeah, it was looking to challenge policing as a concept, looking to create new models of policing within our communities that actually do benefit our communities and do see crime reduced, but like, it's also about the quality of life increasing. So yeah, we want crime to go down, but we also want people to be happier and achieving positive outcomes. So it's looking at policing from a different angle, and also looking at social harm and the things that aren't policed from a different angle. So for me, it's just as important to be policing corporations, like those responsible for cladding of Grenfell, policing organisations like the police, when we consider, you know, Hillsborough and how no one's really been brought to justice like that. And also, if we look at the environment, the quality of air currently in this country is so bad that some people are being told to stay in because they might be harmed by breathing it in. And I feel like environmental offenders should be policed the way that working class people are policed, because policing is not just about crime, it's about social harm. And these organisations and these corporations and these very rich kinds of moralless people are arguably criminals too, yet the law is written to benefit the ruling class and to kind of restrict the activities of the working class.
Wow, that is so interesting. And I wasn't aware that it was something that was even a possibility. And like you say, it might not be written down in paper, but certainly a community action could lead to it. And I wasn't aware that policing was only around for 200 years as well. You're right, it is quite a fairly new concept. You come from a policing background. You used to be a police officer. How is that experience feeding into this particular campaign for you?
I think it's very much the driving force behind my experience, and it's something like yesterday we put a little a few memes, oh well, not memes, they were counter campaigns to the police's. I keep on getting targeted with join the police, help us change the world campaigns with lovely, you know, black and diverse faces on it. And so we created an opposite one with a picture of me in my uniform saying do the right thing for your community, don't join the police, because it, you know, there's a lot of very well-intentioned people who will join the police thinking that they're going to help the communities and, you know, do really good work, and I can't really criticize those people. I was one of those people. I thought that the police was a really good vehicle for me to help my community, and I joined the police from, you know, I worked in a social care background for 12 years, so I joined from working in my community and thinking that this would be a similar setup. And you know how wrong I was. There's very few officers who are in the job to help their communities or to help vulnerable people or to even help victims. The majority of officers are in the job to do all the batony type kicking down doors, going in really hard. They've all got, like, you know, kinds of superiority complexes and a bully locker room mentality. And when you've got people like that responding to the needs of really vulnerable communities, it's worrying. And so I went in with my, like, you know, my social care head on, and something that was often used as a derogatory term towards me was, oh, you're like a mini social worker, stop trying to help them, just lock them up. And I was like, well, when did we stop trying to help people? I didn't realise that's what I signed up for when I became a police officer. So aside from obviously the racism and misogyny that I experienced, like, I, as someone who just wasn't comfortable with being that way and was always challenge any racism or misogyny that I saw, and challenge any, you know, corruption or any suggestions of being corrupt, and was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. Even if we go the long way around, let's do this right. That's not a popular perspective within the police force. There's a culture within the police force which is quite toxic. And in my opinion, I've seen the policies, I've seen what the College of Policing writes the policing should be. I know about, say, Robert Peel's principles. So when we talk about the police being a relatively new social experiment, this is the police in England. The police were used, like, in the colonies as a way of managing colonialism, and in Northern Ireland before it was brought to England in 1829, based largely on colonial models of keeping the working class and keeping kind of dissenting voices in check. And so, like, even by their principles, which is kind of known as orthodox policing history, which is what they tell us the police were brought in to do, being a representative of the community, kind of being rooted in integrity, free from corruption, and really being a servant to the public and listening to the public, and it very much being something that the public consent to. And all these, if you read about policing, you'd actually be like, oh yeah, this is a lovely model, this looks like it could be really good. So what I realised was what's written down in paper at, like, a policy level and a strategy level is not reflected in what happens at a practical level on the streets. And there's a culture within policing which absolutely overrides any policy that they can write. And it's just so toxic. Like, the bad apples, as everyone likes to call them, these officers who are, you know, people who should be nowhere near the uniform or any form of power, they very much kind of run the roost in police, and they're the ones who coordinate how officers act. People look up to how they act, and there's this culture that will kind of champion the police officer who pulls over a pregnant mother on her way to give birth because she was speeding and gives it a ticket, rather than the officer who talks someone down from a bridge who was about to kill themselves. Like, I've seen an officer who stopped someone from causing harm to themselves with a razor blade. A lovely officer, came into the force, as many do, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, wanted to make a difference. People then put razor blades in that officer's locker to mock them for substance, and it's just like, and so when you've had that insider perspective, you realise that it's not an organisation that wants to change. And when they come out and say, you know, after Sarah Everard, after BLM, after all of those things that have highlighted racism and misogyny, oh, we're going to bring out a new policy, we're going to train officers, I just laugh, because I'm like, all of the training in the world is not going to fix that culture. You have to address it at a cultural level, and it's not being addressed at a cultural level. That culture, we know, just last week there was news of another WhatsApp group with racist and misogynistic messages. The culture is completely toxic and it's unfixable. So for me, any tweaking and tinkering with the system with this aim of serving and supporting communities is absolutely problematic. And it's like, and so I'm just like, that's not going to work. And what, at the same time, I think obviously the social care perspective has really helped, because like I worked in Anfield for about 6 years, I worked in Toxteth for about 4 years, I've worked in really kinds of marginalised areas, and I literally, I think about 4 years into my career, the Tories got in, and I watched, like I worked in children's centres, and I watched the funding in marginalised areas just go down, 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 down. The, you know, youth funding, social services funding, education funding, mental health funding, all of those structures that hold communities together and stop people from falling off a cliff, that safety net, that social safety net, the Tories just put massive holes in it through denying those services funding. But at the same time, then these symptoms were coming up of increased criminality, you know, young people not really knowing what to do with themselves, antisocial behaviour. And rather than going and addressing the root of the problem, which was denying areas socio-economic kinds of stability and those services that they need, they just gave more funding to the police to fix the problem, and then started sending more officers into those areas, like a stick and plaster, officers who do not care and are badly trained and don't want to help communities. So they send officers in to deal with mental health, they send officers in to deal with things that should be dealt with at a social services level, youth services, and they deal with it badly. And these, like 80%, like HMRC's own data will tell you that 80% of the incidents police respond to are not crimes. They don't even come in as crimes. Yet what officers will often do, because they want to respond to crime and they will make things a crime just to keep themselves entertained, is they will escalate and they'll push the people they're dealing with until they can get like an assault or an obstruction charge, and then they'll arrest those people and bring them in, and they'll often make the situation worse. Whereas we need care and community members to go out and respond to the needs of the community, because all of this funding and all of these resources that were over here at a social care level have been thrown into the police, who were just acting as a stick and plaster. We were in this situation, there's no win situation. Yes, crime will go up, but crime is not going up because we need more police officers. Crime is going up because you've under-resourced communities, and then you're sending the police in as a response when you need to be kind of looking at reduction, kinds of actions that are going to prevent crime from happening in the first place. You know, we can't always be responding to things, we need to be preventing things. So what Operation Withdrawal Consent is basically doing is like, it's highlighting what the police are saying about themselves, and the fact that, you know, the police only solve 7.8% of crimes. Like, so only 7.8, even by what they say, like only 7.8% of crimes result in like a conviction, a charge, or a summons. You know what I mean? That's not even like getting to the end point. And we look at like things like the Peelian principles. So I won't tell you all the Peelian principles, but these are basically Sir Robert Peel, who founded the police, what he says that the police is rooted in. And two like really stick out for me. So principle number 2 basically says officers faithfully discharge the duties of officer constable with fairness, integrity, diligence and impartiality, and will uphold fundamental human rights and accord equal respect to all people. I mean, I actually thought some of this was comedy when I was reading these Peelian principles. I was like, really? There's nothing impartial about the way our communities police. We only need to look at Parliament to see that working class, there's no impartiality between the ruling class and the working class. Boris got a fine for £50. Some nurses who put on protests against the fact that they were working in horrendous conditions and not getting a pay rise were fined £10,000 for putting those protests on. Students were fined £10,000. Yet the Prime Minister was fined £50. And then obviously upholding human rights and this concept of integrity and being impartial and treating people the same. you know, any black person, Child Q, all of these instances, Dalian Atkinson, Beaver Henry and Nicole Smallman, all instances of the police degrading black bodies and dehumanising people, you know, in some instances leading to the death of people, or not investigating the death of Beaver Henry and Nicole Smallman and taking selfies. We know that people are not all afforded dignity and respect for the human rights. And then we've got principle 9, to recognise that the power of the police to fulfil their function and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions and behaviour, and on the ability to secure and maintain public respect. And this is where I did do some digging. This is where the concept of policing by consent is rooted. And, you know, these principles are nearly 200 years old, but these principles are still what is on the College of Policing's website of what the police is rooted in. These principles are still on gov.uk's website. You can find them there. And below that, it says that we are policed by consent. And the government did kind of drill down, because I think they did see people like me coming thinking, oh, hang on, what are they going to what are they going to come and say? And they said no individual can withdraw consent. It's something that's collectively given by the public. So I'm thinking, when was the last time the public were asked if we consent to this policing? Do you know what I mean? When was the last consultation? When were we last given an option to withdraw consent? Because consent can't just be assumed. Do you know what I mean? We know, like, you can't just assume that we consent to this. You have to ask us. And when was the last time, have you ever checked in with the public and said, do you consent to the level of policing that we've got? You know, we're at a point today, because of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, where someone standing on the street with a megaphone can go to prison for 10 years just for being too noisy. They're trying to have their voice heard. Do the public consent to where we're at? Do you know what I mean? Do we consent to what we saw at the Sarah Everard vigil? Do we consent to what we know is a force that harbours paedophiles, rapists, murderers at one end of the spectrum, and then completely kind of morally redundant and corrupt officers at the other end of the spectrum? And there's very few within that force. There are a few, do you know what I mean? But there's very few within that force who actually really want to help their communities. And do we consent to funding constantly by being diverted to the police at the expense of communities? And so, you know, when I spoke of the principles, I think I told you the vision of the police, and then principle 2. Principle 9 is to recognise always, oh, I like principle 9, it's my favourite. To recognise always that the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. So even by their own principle 9, they're failing on every level. I mean, please do read all 9 principles, because every single one of them they're failing. But if the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, they are failing, and not the visible evidence of police in action, they are failing, because all I see everywhere is police in action. And a more militarised police force, you know, increasingly officers are being given tasers, increasingly officers are being given weapons now, more and more officers are being trained in really militarised task force. So even at a policing level, they're being moved away from that local policing structure and moved into kind of essentially being a standing army. And they're being, you know, they're quite centralised as well. So, and I'm not saying that this was everything, but even when the police were originally, you know, fought up, they were very much rooted and based within communities, and they knew the community and they had that kind of local knowledge. Now the police are centralised and they just fly in and fly out. They've got no local knowledge. They don't care about communities. They don't know what the local landscape is. They don't know what's going on at a community level. And the basically these uncaring bodies who just come in to do a job. They haven't got time to listen to what's happening, and then they fly out. And then there's so much profiling, there's so much stereotyping going on with police. And like last week, the IOPCC report came out, which just absolutely condemned the police for the disproportionately racist stop and searches that they do. But something that always sticks in my mind is, you know, the police are always told to go in with the lowest level of force, like use a low amount of force, you know, get people to understand what they're trying to do and really get people on side, especially if they're doing something like a stop and search, which isn't an arrest, you're just detaining someone, and most of the time people haven't done anything wrong. 77% of stop and searches, the people being stop and searched have got nothing on them, so most people being stop and searched have done nothing wrong. And there's an instance of a boy, a young person who aged between 14 and 16 was stop and searched 60 times by the police, young black lad. Every time he'd done nothing wrong, There's incidents where the police, within 12 seconds of detaining someone, like within 12 seconds of grabbing them and saying, I would like to stop and search you, had already sprayed them with parva, which is basically pepper spray, and handcuffed people. And it's like, and these are black people. And so you've got to question, where is the kinds of rationalisation? Where is the trying to de-escalate situations? And where is your thought process that within 12 seconds of seeing someone, you would pepper sprayed them in the face just because you wanted to stop search them? And they've got like the highest levels of compliance handcuffing, which like I don't think should be a thing. Handcuffing is only meant to happen if someone's meant to posing a danger to you, themselves, or others. Compliance handcuffing is when someone's like just happy, you know, the compliance. So why are you handcuffing them? It's because of something in the officer's head where they think that this person might be a threat. And black people are disproportionately compliantly handcuffed. I know those two sprinters are in the news at the moment, two black sprinters from T and GB who were handcuffed during a vehicle stop when they had the baby in the car and dragged out the car, and they've done nothing wrong. So we've got to question the tactics that the police keep on using within our communities, because they are completely disproportionate, and they're often rooted in this concept of perceiving certain communities as inherently criminal, and these stereotypes that have just persisted over the years of the black community as being criminal. And even the IOPC said that, yeah, they absolutely said that these officers are using a disproportionate amount of force on black people. They even said and they're perceiving black people as a threat regardless of what black people are doing. So they're putting black people in handcuffs and spraying them regardless of what a person is doing. And how can you make a decision-making process in 12 seconds? And they said when these officers are being asked, why are you doing this? Like, why do you keep on using this level of force against black people? They can't come up with a satisfactory answer. They can't explain it. And to me, that just points to one thing. This is racist policing. But this Operation Withdrawal Consent, as a black person, obviously I'll naturally gravitate towards this racist policing. It's not just about racist policing, it's about sexist policing. It's about how communities with disabilities are policed. Like, we spoke to a dad whose son's got autism, who within interactions with the police have been horrendous with this young man because he can't verbally express himself, and they see that as some sort of the young man being rude, and then we'll start to get handcuffs on him because he can't tell them what is happening. And so there's no level of care. And basically what we're asking for is that this 80% of incidents that the police respond to that are non-criminal, they shouldn't be responding to those incidents anymore. We know that they haven't got the skills, the strategy, the temperament, they haven't got any of those things needed. And we know that no training policy is going to change that. We've been trying to tinker with the system forever, for too long. And I'm sick of people saying, oh, we just need to recruit more diverse officers. Oh, we just need to give them a new training package. Oh, they don't know what's happening. We've had the Scarman report, the McPherson report, the Lammy report, the IOPC reporters. We've had personal stories. We've had Child Q. We've had Sarah Everard. We've had. The police know what the issue is, but they know that they don't want to change it. And while we have a government that are just giving them more power and excusing everything that they do, why on earth would they want to change that? So we want 80% of police resources to be put back into the community, but we also want communities to be given the power to respond to those incidents that are going to the police that do not require a policing response. And we also, like, the IOPC are amazing, but they're an advisory panel, and there's a few former officers in there. They do good work, but there's still that kind of link with the police that's there, and there's still this kind of, they basically just advise. They can't really force them. No one can really currently force the police to do anything, and we think that that's wrong. We want panels that are completely independent of the police, who can scrutinise the police, like community panels, not related to police officers in any way, but strongly linked to communities, who can scrutinise what the police are doing and challenge them. But the person who needs to be holding the police to account are police crime commissioners. Like, we've got these police crime commissioners who are political. So when we talk about political impartiality, the people who hold the funding for the police are police crime commissioners who are, associated with Labour or Tories or whoever it is in your area. I know our crime commissioner is Labour. But these individuals, very well-paid individuals, I think they're on about 80 grand last time I checked, so they're really up there. Their job is to hold the police to account and to be the voice of the public and to impose the will of the public on policing. So this idea of policing by consent, they're supposed to be the vehicle through which we consent and through which we have a say around policing. But in most areas, the police crime commissioners and the chief constables are like that. And they're indistinguishable from each other. And the police chief constable very much dictates to the crime commissioner. So how are the community supposed to trust and believe in these crime commissioners when they very much have the ear of the chief constable and will listen to the will of the chief constable, who will tell them how it is? And we really want these police crime commissioners to be listening to the communities. And we kind of did want to have some sort of vote on, do we consent to policing? It's so funny though, because we put a petition in to Parliament to outline what we would like and what we would like Parliament to do, basically take this funding away from the police and give power to communities to hold the police to account. And Parliament declined our petition, and I was like, how democratic, it didn't even get out there, they declined it. And I was like, we're going to put it in again. But this notion of democracy is problematic, because, and this notion that we are able to consent, we really do need to be challenging that, and we really do kind of need to be asking, okay, how do we consent? Because it seems that at every opportunity when we do say, okay, we would like to withdraw consent, the government and the police are putting their hands over their ears and going, we can't hear you. And if it isn't policing by consent, they need to take it off the website, and they need to take it off the government website, and they need to be really transparent about that. So for me, like when I was in police academy, something that I was really bothered by was we had cohorts of American officers coming to our training camps and looking around, and they would go, policing in England is different because the public want this. And it's a bit like, you know, it's a bit like hitting a black person over the head with the baton and being like, but you consented to this. It's like, it's gaslighting on, like, you know, on a state level. It's state gaslighting. And I think, don't tell us we want this when you never asked us. That's not what consent is. So if it is policing by consent, allow us to consent or withdraw consent. That should be an option. That's what democracy is all about. So we need a vehicle to withdraw consent. And so we are asking people to kind of, the biggest vehicle at our disposal, I mean, we know that Elon Musk just bought Twitter, so freedom of speech is a bit questionable at the moment, but one of the biggest vehicles at our disposal, particularly given that the mainstream media are just looking the other way on so many instances. Like, they barely reported that the police crime sentencing and court bill went through yesterday. That was like, you know, Putin took 7 years to get this kind of legislation through in Russia, and Priti Patel has now taken just over a year and she's got it through. Like, that should be front page news. I was speaking to a German reporter when I was in London on Tuesday, and she said, I can't believe that, like, the whole country has not stopped. Like, if this kind of legislation was going in through Russia, she was like, it's fascist legislation. I mean, in Germany, she was like, we would absolutely, the whole country would come to a standstill. We would not allow it. And she was like, why are British people just not bothered? And I was like, the media are not, you know, the media just aren't telling people. And it's really hard to get that message out there. But we need to use social media, and we need to utilize kind of, especially the withdraw consent hashtag, to tell our stories and to talk about why we are withdrawing consent. Like, we've had some really interesting stories in at the moment from people. We've had stories of people being strip searched by officers, people, you know, sending in videos of stopping searches. Again, you know, we've had every end of the spectrum though, like people who, we've had a social worker who, we're going to put the story out soon, but who challenged an officer who was absolutely using disproportionate force against this young lad who'd stolen from a shop, and I think he'd stolen food, and he was off duty with his friend, and they were just like had him in like a headlock and being really, really forceful. And she was saying, like, officers, I'm a social worker, like, please, you know, this young man, like, he looks like he's hungry, he's stealing food, I will pay for the food, please get off him. They were really rude. They started calling her a do-gooder, saying, oh, it's another one of these do-gooders. And she was really, really upset by the way they handled it, the force that was used, and the fact that the young man, she said he also had a disability, like he was neurodiverse, and she said you could see that he couldn't communicate as well. And she said they weren't taking any of that into account, and she was kind of just asking them really politely, please get off him, please understand that he's got additional needs, and he needs, like, this clearly is like a social care incident. and they were rude and dismissive of her. And this woman, you know, she's got a PhD, so she did take it through the complaints procedure, but internally within the police force. And obviously she's a doctor, so she has like a nice letterhead of paper. But the force just sent her, this is Merseyside Police Force, a letter back saying that they supported the officers, and yes, it can be distressing, but the officers knew what they were doing, and they don't know what they're doing. All they know is that this is what she said, even the store owner came out and said, we don't want to prosecute, we don't want to do anything. And so what they did was they put an assault charge through while the guy was like trying to stop them attacking him. They said that he assaulted one of the officers, so they charged him because they couldn't get a charge and a complaint from the shop. And this is the thing, you know, this discretion that officers have, it's always used to the detriment of vulnerable individuals, but they charged the young man with assault because they couldn't get a theft charge from the shop. And,
that is unreal, and yet somehow completely believable, given like it's just one thing after another at the minute. There's just so much to unpick there. I mean, I guess one theme that I've picked out from what you've been saying is that there seems to be a power structure here, and you know, police, and it lends itself to people who are looking for power rather than looking to help other people. And obviously you've said there about how we need to sort of tackle corporations and police them better, and in Parliament they're getting away with whatever they want, and it is all of these structures that are seen as being powerful, and actually these are the structures that are there to represent the people, or to help the people, or to serve the people. And there's no connect there between those two ideologies. It is very much, we've got power and everyone else is just left to sort of deal with it. I really like the idea of giving power back to communities. What would that look like? You know, should this be successful and we are able to somehow withdraw our consent for those 80%, what would it look like in communities? What's the hope for going forward?
So I hate pyramids because obviously capitalism and all that is like a pyramid, but like I know when I worked in social care, a lot of things are pyramids, and kind of you have different levels of calls. So when I was in the police, things would come in as a priority and things would come in as an emergency. And I think it is really, you know, it's a blessing that I have at the social care perspective, because when I was doing the job, I was a bit like, not much of this is crime. Do you know what I mean? A lot of this could be done by people I work with and done a lot better. So I think you know, is getting those, we need to get youth centres back into the community. There are people who will do the work, and I found it really patronising. Like, we have a lot of officers, we've got, you know, we're in relatively new movements, and our social media is relatively new, and all these police officer and troll police officer accounts have followed us. And one of them was like, oh, you know, I like the idea of this, but why don't you just do it voluntary? Everything you're saying can be done at a community level. And I was like, so you keep that 80% of funding to do it badly, but we are expected to do it for free in a really exploitative system where we just do it out of the goodness of our hearts. This is a service that our community needs, and services need to be effectively funded. And it is not fair to ask community members to do things at a voluntary level. And so much of, you know, our welfare services and so much of the services that our communities need are basically held together at the moment by goodwill, and goodwill will only get you so far. Like, I volunteer a lot, but again, there's only so much you can volunteer to do, and for something to be really strategic and to have the resources it needs, like even at a physical level or at an equipment level, it needs to be well funded. So that's completely patronising. And why should an organisation that has absolutely destroyed communities and demonstrated that it's incapable of doing the job keep that funding that has been taken from communities and diverted? So there are instances where that community, you know, funding has been diverted back into the community off the back of BLM, like Texas, Austin, Texas diverted 20 million back into the public health purse. And that's what we're kind of calling for. We're not calling for some new structures would be amazing, but structures already exist within communities, they just don't have the money. So, you know, women's refuges need massive funding. Children's centres, I cannot stress this enough. When I worked in children's centres, we lost 80% of our funding and the impact that that has at a community level, we just couldn't get out. Do you know what I mean? We barely kept the lights on. So we were centralised, we couldn't get to the places we needed to get to, and we couldn't facilitate the community getting to us, and we were just on a shoestring budget. Children's centres need the funding back, and these are organisations that you're not going to see the benefit of what they're doing in a year. It's going to be 10 years down the line when these children are growing up and they've got options, and their only options are not now, you know, join a criminal gang or be stopped and searched by the police as you're scrambling to get an existence together where there's really lack of opportunities. Children's centres need that funding back. Youth centres need that funding back. Health centres need that funding back, and they need to be available at a community level. Massively, massively, massively mental health first aid teams at a community level, homeless refuges and support for people facing homelessness at a community level. So it's getting these services that we've got really sparsely dotted around our community at a centralised level in every area. Like, imagine every area has those services and a hub where you could access those services. But also imagine we had a system where places like, you know, if we look at Child Q School, if we had a structure in place where we've got these, you know, priority and emergencies up there that go to the police, let's call them like level 1 and 2. So this is something where someone's life's in danger, there's a definite crime identified, or it's an emergency. By all means, phone the police, that's got to go to the police. But if there's no life in danger, it's not an emergency, and we don't actually think there's a crime happening, it's just an issue of someone, like, for instance, I used to get calls to instance where homeless people were just maybe sitting in a car park all day, or they were, you know, people were bothered by them, but they weren't actually doing anything. And I'd go, some officers would be going on the Vagrancy Act and moving them on or arresting them for public order. And I'm like, what the hell? Imagine it was the community going out and finding out what they needed and getting some housing forms done, or you know, starting to actually make a difference, because what difference does an arrest make? And equally, you know, Child Q School, imagine that teacher has a little pyramid in the corner going, is this an emergency? Is it causing anyone harm? Or can I call community services or parents who will come and have a conversation with this child? Because at the end of the day, it's a child. And if you suspect that the child's drug dealing, which she wasn't, then a community level response is needed, because that's exploitation. And then if you suspect the child is drug taking, again, which she wasn't, then a community intervention is needed, because we don't want to be criminalising people for substance misuse. We actually want to be helping them. But imagine we had this model where, like, anything that was level 3, 4, 5 and below, we weren't calling the police, we were actually calling identified services who were able to respond. And then they could, if it was going above the level that they were able to respond to, like I did this all the time as a Lincoln family support worker, we were one below social workers. So as social services were being cut like that, a lot of our remit increased, but you'd sometimes go out to something and you'd be like, this is a social service, you know, this needs a social services intervention. You go back and you phone a social worker and say, this has gone above the level that I'm able to respond to. Can you go out to this? Equally, the social services would go out to stuff and they'd go, this does not need a social worker. This needs a family support worker. And they call us up and we go, okay, we'll get out there. And that's what I'm talking about. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's just resourcing the wheel so it can do what the wheel was supposed to have done in the first place. And, you know, when we consider areas that have got arguably low criminality and low crime, it's not even a race issue, it's a class issue, but it's also, let's look at these areas. These are well-resourced areas. They've still got their family centres, they've got good health services, they've got good community services, and they've got a good community infrastructure, and that community safety net is there, whether it's a paid-for safety net or not, it's there. And that's what our community is lacking. So what it looks like is basically getting these services, and, you know, a lot of services have gone under, but those kinds of, that skill set is still within the community. Those people have gone nowhere. So it's finding those people and getting those services up and running, and then finding a structure where they are all talking to each other and identifying families or community members who are in need and in need of support, and making sure that they are on the radar. Like when I worked in Anfield, and this is the beauty of having that community base and that community level of knowledge, we spoke to all of the organisations within that area, the ones that were still standing. Like, we watched a lot of organisations go under because they were underfunded, but the ones that were still standing, we always spoke to each other, and we always knew if something was happening, like if there was a family where someone had lost a job, or there was like someone's mental health was on the decline, and we knew they were struggling for food, we had them on our radar. So they'd come in and we'd be like, oh, do you know we've got food bank vouchers here? Do you know we've got a little, and we'd make sure that they always got what they needed. And when they walked into the next space, they'd be like, oh, do you know we're doing like a bit of a recruitment now? Do you know there's job opportunities in the area? And that's the kinds of response that we need, because families and people like that, if they haven't got that safety net, it could be an organised crime group going, do you know you can make this money by selling drugs for us? Do you know you can do this and we'll help you? Do you know that? Or a loan shark, do you know we can lend you some money? And that's where people fall off the cliff. And it's a very thin line. It's a very thin line. But with a community coordinated response, you can help and you can improve things. And this is the thing, when has increased policing in marginalised communities and communities that are struggling ever helped the problem? It's never helped. Yeah. But every time resources and services have consistently and persistently proven that they have helped. Like the thing that used to drive me mad in the children's centres was we actually mapped the outcomes for children over a 5-year period who'd used our services and then gone into schools, because we worked with the schools, and literacy and numeracy was quite low in the area, and it showed that when children have come through our services and families, outcomes improved for parents, so parents were in work, and all those positive things, but also the children's literacy and numeracy improved, and we could map that what we were doing worked, and we could actually show them what we were doing worked and how it was improving outcomes, and they still took 80% of our funds, and it's like these services work, so don't act like they don't, just get the money back into them. Yet the police persistently show that what they're doing doesn't work and destroys communities, and the government's like, let's give them more money, let's get more officers on the streets, and we're like, no, we do not need this at this moment in time. We don't need it.
Yeah, and I think you've proven on a few occasions there, like what 7.8% of crimes are solved. It's ineffective. It's clearly not working.
Yeah.
But there's an argument that actually the system's working exactly as it's supposed to work, because this is what was designed. This is what the government want. They want us to, well, I say us, communities, to lose that community spirit, because in collectivism, we can collectivize against these things that give them power, that give them money and funding and all of the things that, it is a class system as well, that the rich elites that they need, and I feel like the police force is a tool for that as well. I think you're absolutely right in what you say. If we can fund community services who have the skills and who have the knowledge and could do a far better job, that will be the dream. It will be absolutely fantastic. And yeah, Socialist Think Tank have talked about things like that, a few times, and we're well on board with that. If people want to get involved with Operation Withdrawal Consent, if people want to help, how would they go about doing that?
So please get involved, please help. Like, we need the more people involved with this and the more people shouting from the rooftops. Like, please don't be disheartened by what's happened with the police crime sentencing in Portugal. The reason they brought it in is because we can see that the working class are collectivising and organising and trying to improve things for our communities. And we know, as Laura's just said, that the police are used as a tool to control and kind of subjugate and surveil us and stop us from ever getting the things we need and from rising up and getting, equality, equal pay, a living wage, all of these really radical ideas. But please, if you want to get involved in Operation Withdrawal Consent, follow us on our social media and get in touch through social media. So our Twitter is OWC, Operation Withdrawal Consent 2022. Instagram is at Operation Withdrawal Consent, and Facebook's Operation Withdrawal Consent. You can also just follow or DM me. We have got an email address, which I can't remember off the top of my head because who does email anymore, but the social media is always monitored. So just drop us a DM, and we are looking for people, not undercover police officers, but genuine people who do want to see a change to get involved. I do have to say this because I know there's many abolition movements. We're not saying abolish the police, and the only reason I don't say that is because as much as I've had that insider view, I do acknowledge that there are instances that do need a policing response. There are very serious instances that happen in this country, be it terrorism, be it violent crime, be it violent domestic abuse, that do need people to go in with a level of kit to absolutely deal with the situation. And I can't see any model other than policing that can deal with those high level crimes. But what we're asking for is those 80% of incidents that are nowhere near high-level crimes, that are just communities in need, be handed back to the community and be adequately resourced and kind of funded so we can get those services up and running. And if that's a message you can get behind, guys, please give us a follow, DM us, get involved.
Absolutely. I mean, Chantel, to be fair, I could talk to you about this all day. It is so interesting, and I love how like there's so much intersectionality between, you know, power struggles, class, misogyny, racism, homophobia. It all links together, and it all is all a designed system, and we do have to tackle that. And I think what you're doing is just fantastic, and I do hope people will get involved and will get behind this. We will of course put all the links with this video in the comments. Chantel, I'm pretty sure we're going to invite you on one of our live shows as well, where people can get involved and ask you questions, probably on one of our Saturday night shows, because this is really, really important. You know, this is our communities, this is the lives of the people you live with, and I just think it's a great initiative, and I would encourage everybody to get behind it. So we will drop everything in the comments, along with the links to subscribe to Socialist Think Tank, become a member, join our Discord server, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification button so you don't miss any shows. We will be back soon. Thank you again to Chantel for joining me on the return of the Social Ties, and yeah, have a good one.
We keep the red flag flying, yeah.